It's another Manly Monday, and this Manly Monday, as promised, we are looking at the Duluth model, the pros and cons of the Duluth model. This was a request from you guys, so I asked on 2 Feedback Fridays ago, I think, should I do this? And so I took a bit of time to look into it, make sure I was going to be fair. For people who are new to this, who discovered it through the YouTube algorithm, the way I work is I do not attempt to persuade anyone of one position or another. I present the facts and let you decide for yourself. So if you like this approach, instead of battering you about the head with things, I finally replaced the help support this channel graphic that Eileen did. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Both of these go to helping men recover from, well, abuse themselves. And okay, so starting from the beginning, what is the Duluth model? The Duluth model is a system. You may have seen wheels, something called the power and control wheel. Now, the Duluth model, the original power and control wheel, goes all the way back to the 1980s, 1984, I believe. And I better check that. This will be, 1984. So it's a way of describing specifically abuse between heterosexual couples, abuse among heterosexual couples, I guess. So it's men. Actually, that's not even correct. It's a model for men who beat women. And that's it. That is all it is. And much like cultivation theory that, holds within the confines of the theory, it's been extrapolated upon to just do things it wasn't designed to do. And this is where I get into my personal, the reasons I don't use it. TLDR, the reasons I don't use the Duluth model is, at least in my work, it alienates more people than it brings in. I work primarily with men, and mix of LGBTQ plus and cishet men, or as I call it, if you're new, WSCM. My camera inverted that, I think. I don't know. It's not very useful to me because the language on the wheel is gendered. And the Duluth people, the people at the Duluth model, say this is fine and good, that they are happy with a gendered language model that only helps 68% of cases. And when we get into anything involving psychology, fair, 68% is a pretty good number. And where am I getting that from? I'm getting it from the Duluth website. Here we are, home of the Duluth model. Is the Duluth model effective? And here it is. Where the heck is it? Our research has shown that 68% of men, and this is my first, what does this mean? I do this a lot. What does this mean? Our research has shown that 68% of men who pass through the criminal justice response and are sent to our men's nonviolence classes have not reappeared in the criminal justice system over a course of 8 years. So there's 2 variables there. We don't know how much of that is the model works and how much of that is men just don't want to go back to jail. And do I think some of it is the men's nonviolence classes? Yeah, absolutely. It's just that number, we can't say it's all the men's nonviolence classes, and we have no idea how much of that number is the men's nonviolence classes as opposed to jail is a very scary place and sometimes works as a deterrent. And okay, 68% of men don't reoffend. That means 32% of men do. Now, one of the things that is a fallacy of the Duluth model is that some people say, I'm going to be very careful in this wording here, because some people who use the Duluth model do make the claim that men are inherently violent. My buddy Hines over on his channel ran into one of those fairly recently. That is not the Duluth model. The Duluth model does not believe that. The Duluth model believes it is societal influences that cause men to be more violent than women. It is systemic inequalities. That is what the literature actually says. So anybody who uses the Duluth model, who says that men are just inherent predators or men are just inherently violent, that is them. That is their own embroidery. That is not the model. However, the Duluth model is used to shame men because its language is gendered. So it basically, the theory, like many good theories that broke containment, is now being used places it wasn't intended, and for purposes it wasn't intended to be used. Again, that is not an inherent problem with the model for men who abuse women. The main issue with the Duluth model is not that it's bad, it's that it's incomplete. And it's incomplete for two reasons. One, it doesn't deal with same-sex couples. That something's going on there when there's there isn't great data about the rate of domestic violence in same-sex couples, but based on some studies, it could be quite high. And then there's the fact that obviously it doesn't deal with the instances where women are violent towards men. And it's interesting because the Duluth website, this is when I start going, to me, that's not a great answer. Here it is here. Do women use violence as often as men in intimate relationships? When women use violence in an intimate relationship, the circumstances of that violence tend to differ from when men use violence. Men's use of violence against women is learned and reinforced through many social, cultural, and institutional experiences. Women's use of violence does not have the same kind of societal support. Many women who do use violence against their male partners are being battered. Their violence is used primarily to respond to and resist the violence used against them. On a societal level, women's violence against men has a trivial effect on men compared to the devastating effect of men's violence against women. And that's when I go, okay, I check out, because you don't work with people on a societal level. You work with people recovering from abuse or recovering from abuse on an individual level. And that's when, men who are suffering in silence, because a lot of men do, hear that, they go, well, this system's rigged. And, I completely understand that. And that's why I don't agree with the gendered use of this wheel. I mean, it definitely suggests that gay men are less men. That's one big problem I have with it. But, let's get into this and see any of this is, uniquely male, because we got physical on the one side, sexual violence on the other, violence. But then there's things like, coercion and threats. Well, anybody can do that. Threats of suicide, threatening to leave, making her do illegal things. Anybody can do that in a relationship. Using economic abuse, men still tend to be the higher income earner in relationships. Using male privilege. Remember, this was the 80s, and society has not evolved as much as I would like, but it has evolved. Sorry about the, here we are. I can probably center this better. There we go. There, that's better. Treating her like a servant, making all the big decisions, acting like the master of the castle, being the one to define men and women's roles. I think a lot of guys watching this right now have been, that happened to me in a relationship. A lot of the damage that both men and women feel regarding gender roles come from people's mothers or other women in their lives, teachers, coaches, other family members, sisters. That's not just men who do that. Using children. I have personally witnessed women using the children to relay messages, using visitation to harass, threatening, you won't see your kids, making her feel guilty about the kids. That's done to men as well. And then we get to the other side, using intimidation. Now, okay, physically, one could argue men have an advantage here, but in terms of destruction of property, abusing pets, anyone can do that. But it's all, the language is all gendered. Emotional abuse, anybody can do that, and women are masters of emotional abuse. I will go out on a limb. Oh boy, after the last few weeks, trust me, women are masters of emotional abuse. Women in the last 2 weeks have gone so much farther than any man has with me, making emotional abuse a gendered thing. Oh, it's ultimately about violence. Sure, but this is where the nuance starts falling apart. And this is where I maintain that a non-gendered wheel would work better, understanding that anybody can do this to anybody. So let's finish it off before I get to that. Using isolation, I know women this has been done to. I know men this has been done to. I've known plenty of non-binary people that this has been done to. Anybody can coerce someone using emotional abuse into isolation and then minimizing, denying, and blaming. I mean, a lot of people would say this whole damn wheel minimizes, denies, and blames men for the abuse that they suffered. And it's not intended to do that. Remember, this wheel is only intended to be used for men who beat women. That's it. And, based on that, all right, fine. The non-gendering, the gendering makes sense. And then there's a non-violence wheel and, negotiation of fairness, economic partnership, shared responsibility, responsible parenting, honesty and accountability, trust and support, respect, non-threatening behavior. Like, this is something everyone should be taught. Everyone. And this is where I get into my personal issues with it in my work. Because when you model this is everyone, I have found in my experience, you get way more uptick among men. I model being a tough sumbitch. That wasn't calling myself a bitch. That was son of a bitch. I probably shouldn't use that term because I still use the words bitch. See? Even I slip. I was avoiding MFer. So there you go. I'm tough. And I'm accountable. And I will not belittle people to control them. I refuse to engage in those cheap but effective things. I don't want to hit those buttons, those pain points to temporarily get my way, because I can't tell other people to do it when I do it, like to not do it when I do it. And whenever people claiming to advocate for the Duluth model go out there and say, well, men are innate predators, well, that's not what your model says. And that is emotional abuse. That's because I think a lot of men try to believe it because they're afraid of being violent, especially if their father was violent. And this is what I have found more in my work. Just my work. Can't speak for anyone else. I work primarily with men, but I work with women as well. And, I work with men who have been abused by other men. I work with men who have been abused by women. And I work with more than my share of trans and non-binary people. So, and I mean, the trans and non-binary people definitely have a higher rate of abuse than the general population because they did not conform to those gender norms. And, that's when the I'm a bad mother panic kicks in, and a lot of people have really had numbers done on them by their moms. And so if anything's gendered, it, especially as a woman working with men, that there's this constant barrier that prevents true trust from forming. If we can't preach equality and then treat men and women like different species, where one is the hunter and one is the hunted, that's an absolutely terrible paradigm. But the other problem is, as we get closer to equality, bad actors can use these models to, manipulate the system in their favor. Abuse is abuse no matter who does it. There isn't better or worse kinds of abuse. We criminalize violence because, let's not go into the history of legal systems and how, things like rape and harming someone's wife were considered property crimes historically. Yeah, let's not go there another day. But I want to do better than 68%. I want to stop it before that first run-in with the law. And the only way we do that is deal with the abuse below the threshold of violence. Remember, the Duluth model is only about men who beat women. We have to teach women not to isolate, emotionally abuse, minimize, and coercion, intimidation, male privilege, even the economic abuse. I know multiple men whose ex-partners would do things like steal their debit cards and bleed them dry and then demand they go out and get more money because you're supposed to be a provider, right? These are not gendered things. When it comes to power and control, it is all about systems and structures. That the Duluth model gets right. But if you're signaling to anybody that the class of people that they belong to gets a free pass here, it will be very, very difficult to prove that they're doing these things. Well, that's prime for exploitation. It is. I mean, okay, I love my female outlaw country, but, those songs about keying the dude's car and, spending his money, well, that's more of an R&B song. But, I mean, as much as those revenge songs are guilty pleasures, there's a reason they're guilty. Those are forms of abuse. You know, you don't destroy someone's property because you're angry at them. That's abusive behavior. It is. Even though it's fun, it's abusive behavior, okay? I don't really think it's fun anymore. I am older and wiser than I used to be, okay? Oh, there were times I loved those songs, but I was very angry and very traumatized. And that is the core. We need to deal with everyone's trauma, especially everyone's intergenerational trauma. And yeah, a lot of the time it was dad, but a lot of the time it was mom. And if we educate everyone in the different types of abuse before they're in a position to continue the cycles of abuse with non-gendered inclusive language, then we can do a lot better than 68%, and we can do it without the criminal record. We want to avoid the criminal record. Criminal records are really serious right now. Look at what happened to Jonathan Majors, you know? One bad night. That's it. By Marvel gig, right? Even if he spends no time in prison, and okay, it's a misdemeanor, but it was everywhere in the press. You know, prison shouldn't be the only deterrent. But the thing that happens in a lot of relationships, and they get into, well, women who are violent against men, they're battered. Well, yeah, a lot of men who finally snap and get violent, there's mutual abuse going on in those relationships too. So let's just deal with all of it, okay? Let's just deal with all of it. I am interested in what we call the lawful but awful area. It's not criminal. Emotional abuse often will not land you in prison, but it's wrong, and it absolutely causes harm. Most people who are abused for a prolonged period of time, it's the emotional abuse that really lingers. It's not the violence. I know in my case, that was absolutely true. You know being hit is wrong. It's the head games. It's, in my case, you know, my father was just violent enough, just physically abusive enough to make his threats and coercion and emotional abuse stick. It was about making me afraid. And he truly believed that I, as a child, made him be violent. And I'm far from the only one, you know, and I we'd go to school and it was normalized because it's like, the joke was, in the richer neighborhoods, it's, you got to call home, school called home, parents stormed in and, demanded to speak to the vice principal, and how dare you do this to my child. Where I went to school, if there was a call home because you did something wrong, you got home and what'd you do? Like, child abuse was a punchline. It was normalized, right? And when it's normalized, people know cognitively it's wrong, but in your gut, you don't know it was wrong. And teaching that it's only wrong when men do it, it doesn't get to that gut. Because then you get into this complicated thing of, well, if we're supposed to believe in equality, why is it okay for women to hit men, but it's not okay for men to hit women? And, well, there are different reasons in society that people do it. That's not a winning argument. That's not a winning argument. Remember, we're trying to stop the physical violence before it happens, not prevent reoffending after it does. That latter thing is what the Duluth model's for. If we make it clear that this stuff's wrong, no matter who does it. You know, take out the violence, right? It's all the non-violent stuff, the economic abuse, the use of privilege. And there are, there are places of female privilege. I've seen far too many women belittle their male partner's parenting because he's not the primary caregiver and he wasn't taught. Women are expected to learn how to change a diaper and do other things involving kids, and men aren't taught when we're younger. And I always thought that was ridiculous and stupid, which is why I was aware of it. I mean, there's nothing inherently gendered about changing a diaper, We all poop. No, really, we all poop. But so we can say, because the domestic sphere is often a feminine space, especially in more traditional couples. So, being aware of the privilege you have, especially being aware of the privilege you have as a white woman, especially if your male partner is not white, these are things we have to teach, and then having a different wheel for same-sex couples just makes no sense, because a couple is a couple. Love is love. A commitment is a commitment. If it actually is societal stuff, then it's no different. Two men who are dealing with toxic masculinity, two women who are dealing with toxic femininity, but also toxic well, some gay men deal with sort of toxically feminine traits too, because there's no, heterosexual dimorphism in the relationship. And so there's that, okay, which one's the girl kind of thing. It can really mess with your head. So realizing that it's not all right to isolate anybody. No, it's not okay to tell him he can't go out with his friends because he should be home with his family. Every so often, yeah, if it's too much, it's too much. But a lot of people overuse that card. And, trust me, even if you do it fairly, sometimes your partner resents that, rightly or wrongly. It's something, the problem is a lot of these things, what one person sees as intimidation, another person sees for standing up for themselves. What one person sees as putting your foot down, somebody else will see as putting you down. What one person sees as not taking blame for stuff that didn't happen, somebody else is going to see it as minimizing, denying, blaming. And what one person sees as commitment, somebody else is going to see as isolation. And that's why communication is so important. So I'm going to give you one thing to do to test if the person you're with is being abusive. And this is pretty solid, a pretty solid litmus test. If someone's doing something and it's hurting you, just tell them that. When you say that, it hurts me. And don't overuse it, because you have to be able to hear when you did something that upset the other person. But I'm never going to speak to you again if you do this is not a boundary. I will not accept being spoken to like that. If you speak to me again, I will leave. And we can continue this conversation when you're prepared to not call me that. That's the difference. One's a threat, one's a boundary. One is about what the other person must do. The other is what you're going to do if a person continues that behavior. So, that phrase, calling me that, hurts me. I would like you to stop doing that. If a person goes, too bad, you deserve it, well, that's abusive, because people in a loving relationship shouldn't knowingly want to hurt someone, especially out of vengeance. If someone says, well, then what term can I use because this is important to me? okay, you can have a conversation about what's a more acceptable term so you can stay regulated. And then obviously, ideally, you say somebody to stop and they just stop. And whether you feel like something's being taken from you or not, this is something I learned, and it's been a lifesaver. Stop means stop, don't means don't. No matter your reasons. Stop and then find out why it's a problem. Don't refuse to stop until you're given an alternative. Because if you do that, you're not being abusive. The other person might be, but you control you, they control them. That's simple, right? It's one thing that separates abuse from just a simple misunderstanding. If someone says, stop calling me a liar, I didn't lie, for instance, stop calling them a liar. It may have been a misunderstanding. That's an accusation that's thrown around way too much these days, I think. If somebody doesn't like to be told they were stupid, stop calling them that. Find something like careless or sloppy or something they can agree with. It's like, okay, I can accept that. I see your point there. And obviously, I feel statements of, I felt hurt or it really put me in a bad spot when you did this is much better than going, that was stupid. But everybody has a different tolerance and everybody slips in conversations. A slip of the tongue, not your best moment, does not make you an abuser. But if someone says, stop, you're hurting me, and you continue, I don't care who you are, that's abusive behavior. Real simple, right? I think starting from there and building from there for everybody, same set of rules for everybody, can really help us, eat into that 32% of men who reoffend and 100% of women and 100% of people who haven't offended yet and 100% of gay people, there are so many more groups that one wheel to rule them all, right? Let's get a one wheel. Let's get one wheel to rule them all, right? And of course, we can't do that without the permission of the people that made the Duluth model because, they're right. It's just incomplete. And they have partners that do degendered wheels, but until they finally cave and go, no, you know what? We're going to own it all. I do think those numbers are being sticky. And that's part of the reason I got into this stuff, because the domestic violence numbers of men against women are not going down. We're still firming up the numbers of, domestic violence, male, domestic violence, female. We know the numbers of men who are reporting being abused by female partners is going up. So something's not working. One number's not going down. One number's going up. This is not the way, right? Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching Manly Mondays.